Okay, great. Well, thank you everybody for coming. My name is Jamie Dorn. I'm the Executive Director of Research, Innovation, and Entrepreneurship here at Georgian College. We have a really great talk for you today called XR Initiatives at Georgian College. But before I get into that, I want to acknowledge that Georgian College acknowledges that all campuses are situated on the traditional land of the Anishinaabe people. And Anishinaabe include the Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, and they're collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. And Georgian is dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect with all First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people. So today I mentioned that we're going to be hearing about XR initiatives at Georgian College. We're going to be hearing from Rob Theriault, and Rob Theriault is the Immersive Technology Manager for Georgian College. He's been a paramedic for the last 35 years and an educator for the past 20. And after integrating virtual reality into the paramedic program, he proposed that virtual and augmented reality needed leadership to encourage adoption at the college. And the rest is history because lots is going on now. Rob has a Bachelor of Health Sciences in Paramedicine from Victoria University in Melbourne, Australia, and a Master's of Educational Technology from UBC. He is a published author, researcher, blogger, podcaster, and speaks at conferences across Canada and internationally. So everybody, welcome Rob Theriault. Rob, I can't wait to hear you talk.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Jamie. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see everyone. Just by way of background, in terms of my initiation into virtual mixed and augmented reality, and sort of carry on from what Jamie described, well, first of all, I'll tell you that I have 2 degrees, but I've never been to university. So I did both my undergrad and my master's online, and they were both asynchronous, and it was a very isolated experience and somewhat frustrating. So when I first started teaching online, I was determined to make it a mix of synchronous and asynchronous, which I've been doing since around 2005. And throughout my teaching career, at least, I've always been thinking about, how students might learn best. And a few years ago, I attended a conference, a paramedic educator conference, and got to see virtual reality for the first time. And what I saw was someone wearing a virtual reality headset, and what he was seeing was being projected on a big screen. And there was an animated patient sitting on the edge of the bed. And when I saw the TV screen version of it, quite frankly, I wasn't that impressed. It was a little underwhelming. It looked like any animated simulation I'd seen in the past. And then I put the virtual reality headset on, and it was a completely and utterly different experience. It was a real wow moment for me, as it is for many people who try virtual reality for the first time. And the wow part of it was that when you put a VR headset on, if you've never done it before, it's like immersing yourself in a video. You feel like you're right there. And I was standing in front of this patient, and I could hear him struggling to breathe, and I could see the anxiety on his face. And even though he was animated, it looked real enough that it affected me emotionally, and the way it would for any paramedic who encounters a really sick patient. So I could hear him struggling to breathe. I could see his lips were discolored from a lack of oxygen, and I could speak to him. And when I spoke to him, he responded with 4 to 5 words between taking breaths. And that's, an indicator that someone is in moderate respiratory distress. I could take a stethoscope and I could listen to his chest and identify abnormal lung sounds. I could apply a blood pressure cuff and ECG leads and oxygen and take a history. And I could even walk over to his night table and pick up his medications. And oftentimes looking at prescription medications gives you some insight as a nurse or a paramedic into what the patient's medical history is, because patients don't always know what their medical history is. And at the end of that experience, I was completely awestruck, and it was a lot like going to a really engaging or captivating movie where when you step out of the theater, you just need some quiet time to process what you experienced. And that was how I felt after that first virtual reality experience. And two things really stood out for me. One was that I got the same twinge of adrenaline that I get as a paramedic when I encounter someone who's quite sick, and I recognize that I need to assess and treat them quickly before they deteriorate. And the second thing that struck me was that in this experience, there was context. I was in his house. I was in the place that I would be if I was doing a paramedic call, just as if you were doing a nursing simulation or medical simulation, you would be in the hospital, for example. And it struck me that this context was really important. When I talked to my first year paramedic students about case presentations, they see a PowerPoint slide with text describing how the patient presents, and I might show an image, but they really have no context, no sense of what someone in respiratory distress looks like and sounds like. And so that combination of the fact that it actually affected me and gave me a little twinge of adrenaline, and that there was context, I thought this is very powerful. So we introduced virtual reality into our paramedic lab using a mass casualty incident triage simulation. And that led to some discussions with other faculty about looking at some other virtual reality experiences. And I had a VR headset in my office, and I would literally jump out of my office and into the hallway and grab people and say, hey, do you want to try this virtual reality anatomy? It's really cool. And so one of the faculty members from occupational and physiotherapy assistant program would take a look at it, and someone from the biotech degree would take a look at it, someone from nursing would take a look at it. And so I was just, sort of soliciting staff to try some experiences. The other thing that struck me about virtual reality as I began to explore it further is that it's the only educational technology that I'm aware of in which students can learn in the psychomotor, affective, and cognitive domains. I really don't know of any other educational technology that enables, that provides a platform for that kind of learning. And so I'll touch on some of those things and how they work in virtual reality. The difficult part about doing presentations like this, and I've done quite a few of them now, is I can't really take you into virtual reality. I'll show you a couple of video clips so you get a sense of it, but you really have to experience it. You have to be able to step into it and walk around in it to realize that kind of spatial experience, being in a space that feels real, even though part of your brain knows it's not real, is really really gets the neurons firing. So let me give you some examples. Our architectural technology program has the longest history of virtual reality. They've been using it for about 5 years, I believe. And it's an area that makes perfect sense because students learn to design buildings in 2D on a laptop computer, and then they get to experience it 3D to scale. And that's very different. It's a very different way of looking at your design. So you're stepping into the building you designed, and when you step inside it and you look at it, you see things differently. Your perception is different because it's real or quasi-real. And so you might look at the ceiling and think, oh, this ceiling could actually be elevated a couple more feet to make this area look more spacious. And the hallway is much wider than I sort of saw on the 2D screen. So we can narrow this down by a foot. And this spiral stairway just occupies space unnecessarily. And so without affecting the structure of the building, I think we can move it over here. So that's a very powerful experience. And it makes perfect sense in some of the design arts like architectural technology, interior design, industrial design, and other similar programs. The first pilot we ever launched was in our Indigenous Studies program. So I was attending a language event in virtual reality, and it struck me, I'm not a language teacher, but it struck me that context was rather important in language learning. So we have 4 Indigenous language courses. One is called Language in the Home, another is Language in the Community, the third one is Language in the Workplace, and the fourth one is Language in the Natural Environment. So I built a house for them. Well, I took a template of a house and furnished it on a platform called AltSpace VR, which is a Microsoft product. And when I approached the Indigenous faculty, they completely embraced the concept. They were eager to explore it, and they did, and they began using it. And faculty and students met every Thursday for about 30 minutes at a time. 20 to 30 minutes is probably the maximum amount of time you want to spend with a virtual reality headset on. And they would come into the space and they would go into the house and they would have conversations in the kitchen and in other parts of the space. And I'll just play this video while I'm talking about this. And this is me and Dr. Jamie Doran, who introduced me, having a conversation in the kitchen. Neither of us are Indigenous, but this is just gives you some idea of what the kitchen looks like. So in this particular platform, you can see information buttons located throughout the house. And when you click on those information buttons, you see the Anishinaabe, Moin, and English words on there. And so they can go into the backyard and out to the front. The house is located on a big property. And if you want to build a house on a beautiful property, you can do that in virtual reality. It's much easier than in real life. And there's a fire pit out on this piece of land. And what's really cool is the elder who comes to speak with the students at Georgian College used to come about once a month or so to visit the students. And they approached her and said, would you be willing and interested in going into virtual reality and meeting with the students there using a computer or a virtual reality headset? And she embraced both completely. She had never used a computer before. She's 84 years old. And she now has avatars in AltSpace VR for Bella, which is a 2D platform, and Engage VR. And she now meets with them once a week, and she does prayer and she does some storytelling. And she's really embraced it. And in fact, we built a small town for their language in the community and named the school, well, the Indigenous Studies faculty, not me, but let me just, there we go. The Indigenous Studies faculty named the school after her, which just sent a shiver down my spine. I thought that was such an honor to do that for her. So this is what the town looks like. And what you have to imagine is you're looking at an image now. This is in Engage VR. You're looking at an image now, but what you have to imagine is that you're actually in this town walking around, and you can walk into the school and you can walk into the hospital and you can walk to the powwow grounds. And you can actually have conversations with students. And one of the nice things about platforms like Engage VR and AltSpace VR is the students can meet there outside of class time, and they can just have conversations, they can just socialize, they can do project work together. And I'm hoping that students will start to use that more and more. I've seen a few students using that because you don't get the same connection with classmates on a video conference. So for example, when on a video conference, few people actually make eye contact with one another because you know the image of the person you're talking to is at the bottom of the screen and your camera's at the top of the screen or somewhere else. But on a platform like AltSpace VR, for example, what's incredible is when you're standing in front of someone, you can see their eyes making contact with you. And the way it works is the eyes of the avatar in AltSpace VR track the sound of your voice. So if you're talking, the eyes are looking at you, and you genuinely feel like they are there with you. You can see their hands moving, excuse me, and you can see their eye contact. You feel a sense of presence of being with them. And Jeremy Bailenson, who is a founding director of the Virtual Human Interaction Lab at Stanford University, used to do psychology research, and to test the sense of presence, what he would have people do is walk on a plank at a high altitude and use some biometrics to get a sense of their fight or flight response when they walk on this plank and they feel like they can fall. And people do get a fear response. But you can get the same sense of presence just by being with people in a virtual environment. And the way I do it is, if I move my avatar a little too close to you, you're going to feel as awkward in front of me as you would in real life. It just feels wrong. Like you're in my space and you have to move away. And in fact, the first time I experienced that was when I attended an event and I sat a little too close to someone and said, "Oh, sorry about that." And I moved my avatar over a couple of inches. So you get that sense of presence in an immersive virtual reality platform that you can't get in any other synchronous online environment. There are many other interesting aspects about virtual reality, and Jeremy Bailenson in his book Experience on Demand says, when you think about the use of virtual reality for learning, think about it. One of the lenses through which to think about it is, does it provide an experience that might otherwise in the analog world be dangerous, impossible, counterproductive, or expensive? I would add some other qualifiers like difficult and impractical as well, but just to give you some examples of what I'm talking about here. So this is, again, Dr. Jamie Dorn and I having a conversation in a volcano. Now, if you're studying volcanology, I'm quite certain you could not get inside a volcano and walk through the lava as he and I did. It's really quite an incredible experience, but you can do that in virtual reality without any danger whatsoever. Well, I call this impossible, but this is a replica of the International Space Station, and a group of us were, floating around the International Space Station, flying basically. And you can also get inside the space station and see what it looks like. This may not be impossible, but certainly difficult for most of us earthbound people. The other thing that I love about virtual reality is this concept of infinite scalability. So there's a professor who has built a SARS-CoV-2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19, and he's made it the size of a world. And he and his students meet on this virus, and they can grab the proteins and play with them. And there are all sorts of information placards around the space for learning, and they meet and they have classes in there. If you were teaching entomology, you could shrink your avatar down the size smaller than a bug. And when I think about that, I think of this horrifying game where the bugs try to eat you. But why would you do that in education? You just want to see bugs from close up on a really small scale. Now, the other thing that's really beneficial in virtual reality is being able to do things with your hands, having agency, learning skills, for example. And these are two examples of images. One of these is from UBSIM on the left, and it's a nurse who is preparing an insulin administration to a diabetic patient. And she goes to the stock room, she gets the appropriate equipment, she brings it back to the patient's room, she washes her hands, she draws up medication, puts it into an intravenous bag, connects it to IV tubing, etc. And she's going through the steps. And when you're able to do those steps repeatedly, even though you don't have the same tactile sensation, the process of going through steps is very powerful. And I'll just read, on your right here is a product called OssoVR. It's for surgery. And let me see if I can move this around here a little bit. So this was a small study, it was a small cohort, and they took second-year medical students and they divided them into two groups. One was a group that was going to learn a surgical procedure by the standard means, so video, lecture, discussion, and the other learned this surgical procedure using virtual reality. And they found the percentage of steps done correctly in VR versus standard was 63% versus 25%. And the students' retention of the knowledge of the instruments for the surgical procedure was 50% in the VR group versus 11% for the standard group. So even though it was a small cohort, to me, that's a pretty powerful proof of concept for learning psychomotor skills in virtual reality. I'll talk about some of our other pilots here. So our veterinary technician students learned how to do animal dissection in virtual reality. And here's an example of what that looks like. So they see this animal on a tray, and there's a virtual tutor, Wendy Martin in this case, and she gives them instructions on what they're going to be seeing and what they're going to do. And I'm assuming you don't hear the audio here, which is probably a good thing. And you don't see it, but there's another table that has some surgical instruments, and so you're instructed on which surgical instruments to grab and then where to make cuts. And then you can remove the organs and you can hold them in your hands and look at them close up and examine them. There you go here. And so on. So now, this is a great tool for learning dissection. As you might imagine, in a veterinary technician program, it might be difficult to get your hands on 50 dead animals to practice dissection. So you can do this independently, and you can do it repeatedly, so that when you come into the lab, maybe you're doing it as a group, but you're much more prepared and familiar with the anatomy of the animal. There's also a quiz function. Now, the downside to this experience is there are no analytics. So there's, the value of this experience is limited to, students who use it often enough, and maybe they could write a reflection paper on it. But the next step I think this company needs to do is create some analytics, so the student and the faculty can get some feedback on their experience. So that was, sorry, let me just move on to the next slide. Okay, so this is a product that we're using with our advanced care paramedics, and it's from Health Scholars, and this is an interesting one. It uses voice recognition and artificial intelligence, and the student stands in a room, and there's a sick patient or a patient in cardiac arrest on the floor, and surrounding that patient are a group of avatars, and each have name tags. And the student simply talks to those avatars. So the student will say, Aaron, can you check for a pulse? Phil, can you start chest compressions? Fatima, can you defibrillate and start an intravenous line? Ross, can you administer a milligram of epinephrine? And the analytics at the end of the program gives the student and the faculty feedback on what the student did, the sequence in which they did it. Did they give the right drug, the right dose, the right route to the right patient, et cetera? And that's quite powerful. We are looking at virtual reality anatomy in our biotech degree, paramedic program, and nursing program. We're actually doing some research right now where students are randomized to a standard versus a virtual reality experience. And a lot of students describe the virtual reality experience as a hands-on experience. In fact, one student said it was the first time he'd had a hands-on experience since the pandemic. And so I think the potential for using virtual reality for distance learning is really intriguing. And I've had some preliminary conversations with some of our senior management team at the college to explore a flexible enrollment plan where in the future, a student can choose to enroll in a face-to-face class, or maybe a standard online class, or a virtual reality class. And in the virtual reality class, they would forego getting a textbook, maybe use an open source textbook and use virtual reality. And the cost of the software is about the cost of a textbook. And the program is really quite compelling when you're standing in a room, in a virtual room, and the anatomical model is the same size as you, and you can take it, you can enlarge it, you can shrink it, you can turn it around, you can look at the different axes of the body in a 3D environment, which is much more powerful than in a 2D environment. And I'll show you a little video. This was from a product called BodyWorks. And again, unfortunately, it's a 2D video that you're looking at, and I'll just pause it here. Let me just get rid of this. And it's hard to describe, but so when I was in virtual reality looking at this heart, the heart was the size, I was actually a little taller than me. It was about 6.5 feet tall. That's how large the heart was. And I could walk up to it, in fact, I could stick my head right into the left ventricle and take a close look at the papillary muscles and the chordae tendini, and watch the atrioventricular valves open and close if I turn my head up and down. It was really something. It was a beautiful thing, much more engaging and compelling than 3D applications on a tablet or a phone or something of that nature. It was really quite impressive. Now, other programs that we've run pilots in, for example, let me just bring up the next slide here. So our events management students were using virtual reality to learn how to create and run events in a 3D environment. They used AltSpace VR, Engage VR, Verbella, which is more 2D, and ArtGate. So 3 students organized an art exhibit in virtual reality, which is very cool. Our tourism students, they're a little delayed. They're looking at creating some tours, 360 videos, that sort of thing, possibly this summer. Yeah. Hello. Hello. I hear someone's got an open mic. Okay, well, I'm going to continue on.
Yeah, I think you can continue, Rob.
Yeah, okay. This is a physics lab in Engage VR, and it's a lot of fun. It's sort of a gamification. So you try to sink this ship with a cannonball, and I tried sinking the ship. I think I shot cannonballs 32 times, somewhere around there, and finally gave up and did the math. And when I did the math, I was able to sink the ship, and that was a lot of fun. Really interesting way to learn physics. Now we have a nursing lab at our Orangeville campus, and they're using a product called SimX for patient simulation. And I love this product. It's so cool. So the simulation is moderated by a faculty member who moderates it from a laptop computer. And the student or 2 students go into this virtual environment. They're in a room, they see a patient, they're talking to the patient, talking to the husband, or talking to the sister, and the patient is answering back. And they're able to take a stethoscope, listen to the chest, apply blood pressure cuff, apply a pulse oximeter, apply ECG leads, give the patient oxygen. They can pick up the phone and call a doctor, give a report, get some orders, and then begin to treat the patient with medication. And that combination of being able to assess, develop a nursing diagnosis, contact a physician to get orders, be able to treat, reassess the patient to see the response to the treatments, and also be able to do things with their hands step by step, and learning how to do it in the proper sequence is that kind of embodied cognition is difficult to replicate other than in a hospital setting, for example. When the students go into the VR lab, or sorry, into not the VR lab, but when they go into the nursing lab, they see the same mannequins every day, the same students role playing every day, but virtual reality gives them context. They're in a hospital room, they're in a different environment, they're seeing a different patient every time, different gender, different ethnicity, different age, and that's quite powerful. Not meant to replace the lab, but to supplement it in a very powerful way. And I was talking to the nursing faculty who teaches in this program, and she said to me, she couldn't believe how easy it was to check off the students on their competencies in this environment. And she said that the students just absolutely love it. They feel completely engaged in it. They're in a 20 by 15 foot space. They're walking around the hospital bed. What's amazing to me, partly amazing to me, is the fact that part of your brain knows it's not real, part of your brain feels like it's real, and you know that because the students actually walk around the bed when they could be walking right through it if they wanted to. Really quite remarkable. Our trades are using virtual reality to learn a variety of skills. This is one where they're learning how to work at heights. So they don a safety vest in virtual reality. They learn where to hook it up so that they're safe. We're working in collaboration with 7 other colleges right now in a company to develop a virtual reality app for our power engineering students to be able to work in a boiler plant and how to operate a boiler plant. And this is a good example of something that would otherwise be very expensive and potentially quite dangerous that they can learn in virtual reality. So I'm looking at my time here. Future plans. I have lots and lots of ideas around future plans. I'll just touch on some of them. Before I talk about these, I want to talk about another sort of emerging technology within virtual reality, and that is biometrics. So biometrics are things built in the headset, like inward facing cameras that can do eye tracking, measure pupillometry, incorporate galvanic skin sensors, check your pulse, your breathing, your facial expression. And that might sound frightening from a privacy perspective, and it should frighten everyone from a privacy perspective, but it's also an incredible opportunity to begin to look at, to be able to measure cognitive load in virtual reality, to be able to measure stress level and provide lessons in virtual reality, for example, in healthcare or in emergency services, policing, fire, paramedic, nursing, medicine, be able to provide scenarios that are scaffolded in a way from low acuity to higher acuity to build stress resilience into the learning experience. That really excites me and is a huge opportunity for research going forward. So some of the things I'm hopeful that we'll be exploring and embarking on in the future. We have a demo scheduled for February from a company called Flame Trainer. And this is a mixed reality experience where, if you look at the top left-hand corner, where a firefighter student has a VR headset. They have actually a breathing device that measures their breath rate, which gives the fire captain some indication of when the firefighter needs to come out of the fire and get some relief and be replaced. The tank is actually a computer. Instead of a controller, they have a heavy hose, and it's tethered to a device on the ground. So when the student is fighting a fire, she gets a sense of how heavy the hose is and the resistance to the hose as she's trying to put out the flame. She can fight several types of fires. I think it's between 20 and 40 different fires, including kitchen fires, high-rise fires, electric vehicle fires, airplane fires, etc. On the right is something called Tilt Brush. Now people use Open Brush, which is a multiplayer system, and students can sculpt and they can paint in virtual reality. So they can learn those techniques in virtual reality, not to replace standard art, but what's a couple of things that are really interesting about this is when they sculpt in VR, they can 3D print their products. And my hope is that this will create a new employment opportunity for graduates in the XR industries. On the bottom left is something called equal reality. This is an embodied experience where you adopt the avatar of someone, for example, someone of color, and get to experience cultural microaggressions. Some people refer to these kinds of experiences as walking a mile in someone else's shoes. It can be very powerful in addressing and eliminating cultural bias. We're also doing exploring software called Bodyworks right now at Georgian College, which is a soft skills platform and which can address racism and sexism and interview skills and a whole host of things. On the bottom right is a tanker ship. You might be wondering what that is. Well, we recently purchased some camera equipment, and I'm hoping to create some digital twins of our chemistry lab and a number of other places in the college. But we've also been asked by one of the managers at one of our satellite campuses to go out to one of the tanker ships and create a digital twin of the engine room, because our marine engineering students don't get to spend a lot of time in the engine rooms, and when they do, they may not be fully prepared. So creating a digital twin of it would enable them to go into the engine room as often as they want, either on their PC or in a virtual reality headset, and explore the engine room and get to know where everything is and how everything functions. So those are a few of the things we're doing. We're also doing collaboration work with a few different universities, doing some research work. I have many other ideas about virtual reality, but we're mostly doing pilots right now, small cohorts of 10 to 25 students. And I think two of our early successes, one in our Indigenous studies, we've gone from pilot to full integration into curriculum for language learning. And virtual reality anatomy is another one that's looking like it's going to be quite successful. So with that, what I would say is if you're a Georgian College faculty and you want to learn more about this, please feel free to reach out to me, send me an email, and we'll set up a time to meet. I would say that the first thing is to, are there compelling applications that exist? And, can we explore them together? Can we pilot and evaluate them? There's lots of low-hanging fruit for researchers. So I think this should excite a lot of researchers. And then look at integration. And of course, you have to look at what's the return on investment for integration, what's the cost, and what's the cost per student, and does it address something that's the learning objectives that would otherwise be difficult, impossible, dangerous, expensive, counterproductive, etc., to address, or does it address it in such a way that it enhances learning? All of these things are, metrics by which we can look at its value. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I kept my glasses off because it was causing too much reflection, but I'm going to put them back on so I can actually see who I'm talking to.
Great.
And,
well, thanks, Rob. There's so many interesting things in this talk. We could, talk about each one for an hour. I see a couple questions in the chat, so I'm going to relay those to you. The first one says, how long will it be until we have tactile/touch sensations in VR? Because, during lockdown, people need those virtual hugs, and it would be great to actually feel that.
Yeah. Well, those things exist now, but they're bulky and they're expensive. Actually, I've been having conversations with a company called Tesla Suit, and it's a full body suit. It's a tactile suit, and it's interesting in a lot of ways. I'm not sure it's designed necessarily for hugs, but you can adjust the tension on parts of the suit so that the student might be able to experience what it's like to be elderly and have arthritis and have difficulty bending their joints, which is really interesting. And it can do motion capture for dance. It can do motion capture if you wanted to learn Tai Chi or one of the martial arts. You could go into a virtual environment and your entire body can be tracked while you're doing that. So yeah, the technology is there. I would say 5 years we'll start to see it at the consumer level. 10 years it'll be pretty commonplace. That's just my guess. I'm not a futurist, so I thought about becoming a clairvoyant, but I just couldn't see the future in it. So.
Well, I've got a crystal ball. I can see the future, so it's coming. All right, so then more questions are, do you know of any initiatives or teaching opportunities for younger students in elementary or high school with this kind of immersive technology?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I haven't delved too deeply into the K-12 area, but there are some companies that provide a suite of software for kids around 13 years of age and older. Viative is one of them, Veative. Another one is Victory XR. They have a whole suite of stuff. And if you wanted to reach out to me, I could talk to you about what I know that's available and how you might set up a VR lab at a high school or middle school.
And Kat says in the chat here that at the rec room in Barrie, they have VR available, so you can go there and try it out.
Oh yeah, it's just down the street from me. Yeah, I might have to pop in there.
So Kat's got another question here, or a question that says, how accessible is VR technology for our Georgian students? Do they need to have their own headsets?
Well, it's limited right now because we're still in pilot stage. I would love to see a group of students with their own VR headsets reach out to me and we'll start a VR club and start exploring stuff together. So we're not quite there yet.
We do have quite a few headsets out in our college community. How many have we got out there right now?
We got about 200 and close to 100 are deployed for distance learning. So I've got a dog here who's looking to get outside.
It's the way it is these days.
The beauty of working online, yeah.
I've got a couple questions for you.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, why do you think the Indigenous Studies group embraced VR so readily?
I think a couple of reasons. I think first and foremost, the context, right? So if you're learning a language in the home, what better place to learn it than actually in a home? It's a field trip. A field trip that would otherwise be, really difficult logistically and cost-wise to bus students to a powwow or to a small town where they can go into the band office and walk around the town and have conversations. So I think context first and foremost. Plus, you know, I looked at the research around language learning and context and learned that one, context increases the retention of language, but also being able to interact with objects, which is a feature we have in our Engage VR worlds, also raises the retention level another notch. The other thing that Indigenous Studies is excited about doing, and I'm working with them on this, is to partner with other colleges and universities across Canada to share their worlds to help to preserve language. So really excited about that. We're in talks with Red River College in Manitoba and the University of British Columbia in BC, and I'm hoping to create sort of an Indigenous peoples in XR community, or help create that, you know, with our Indigenous faculty.
And be interesting to link all those worlds together into Indigenous metaverse.
Yes, exactly.
You talked a lot about health and wellness and medicine in some of your examples, and there's a question here that says, you know, how about if there was some kind of suit or gloves or something that gave you real-time changes in touch or pressure so that you could actually do surgery, maybe real surgery, say with a digital twin?
Yeah.
Where are we at with that? Have you heard any examples?
So telemedicine exists now, and you can do surgery remotely. It's usually done using robotics rather than a person performing the surgery from a distance. The challenge is the latency between, you know, a surgeon doing the surgery from here on a patient who's in some remote place. So that can be difficult, but it's currently being done with using robotics, and so that's going to continue. The interesting thing about robotics too is, you know, if you put a robot into the Fukushima nuclear plant that had a meltdown, what you would see is the inside of the nuclear plant from a window, from a screen. But imagine if you had a virtual reality headset on and you become the robot and you can see 360 around the lab. That is a very different experience. So I think that sort of, you know, transposing yourself into another world with reality is really exciting. But on the medicine side, I think what we're going to see is a mixed reality experience where you're in a VR headset, but you're doing tactile procedures on an actual mannequin. Only the mannequin looks like a very sick, distressed person, and is able to move. So you've got a slightly more advanced mannequin, and you've got the virtual component that gives you context.
So interesting. Last week or so, I thought I had $1 billion idea, and I reached out to a friend to talk about it. And turns out somebody's already working on it. I'll tell you it now. And it essentially it's immersive VR, but for sports fans, so that, you know, you can put your headset on, you can be at field level, you can be on the field, you can be in the stands. And I thought, hey, that'd be really amazing. Go to a hockey game. You know, you can't afford to maybe buy real tickets, but it would be essentially a digital twin of the game. And I guess they did that with the World Cup last year. And so those kinds of experiences are pretty interesting and have a ton of potential.
Yeah. Yeah, you can actually train as a football player in virtual reality. There's a company called Striver, which was co-founded by Jeremy Bailenson from Stanford, and you can actually train as a football player in virtual reality and learn the plays of other teams in a more engaging way than on a 2D screen. So yeah, you can be at the court side, at the rink side in VR. It's incredible.
I'm going to just ask the audience if there's any questions. If you have one you want to say, you can unmute yourself and fire your question. Okay, I don't see any coming. So I got one more for you, Rob, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
All right. So you touched on this in your talk a little bit, but we know that, you know, VR is really great, but it's not a replacement for traditional modes of teaching, right? So it's not a replacement for the classroom or professor in front. It just adds something to it, but it's also in its infancy.
Mhm.
we're at, in my mind, the Atari stage of all this stuff right now. So we've got a long way to go to get to, the PlayStation level or Xbox level. So how important do you think this technology is going to be for teaching in, say 5-10 years?
I think it's going to be really important. And I think, no teacher likes to hear this, but I think teachers will be replaced for certain learning experiences, either using artificial intelligence or virtual reality or a combination of those. For example, artificial intelligence can provide math lessons, and we have thousands of students who take math every year at all the colleges, and some of them could be doing it using AI. I think in the future, even now, you can learn some trade skills in virtual reality and get a micro credential out of it by taking a series in a certain subject area. You still have to do the hands-on component, but if you do the hands-on component in virtual reality often enough, it's just a matter of doing it in the real world with the tactile component. But you've gotten through the largest part of the learning curve in virtual reality. So eventually, with haptic gloves, haptic suits, virtual reality, I think you're going to see a lot more people acquiring skills and knowledge in that mixed reality experience before they hit the real world. And it could conceivably replace labs, not in the near future, but maybe 10 years, 15 years out. I find it hard to predict because we are on the knee of that exponential curve in technology, and it's difficult. It's accelerating very fast. And on that note, I think it's so important for educators to begin to explore it now, because I'm finding it's still early days. And the people, I talk to companies all over the world, and I'm mostly talking to CEOs, and I'm able to give them feedback on what I think is pedagogically important. In 5 years from now, we might be speaking to salespeople, and we won't have that connection with CEOs. So this is a good time to be in this field as an educator and exploring it and piloting it and researching it and seeing if it, is appropriate for integration into curricula.
Great comments. Kat asks, are there opportunities for staff and faculty to join a project or participate in VR at Georgian?
Yeah, so I would reach out to me and we'll have a conversation. By the way, I just posted a link to my slides.
Excellent. And we have our future skills project on, where one of the pilots is about helping our staff get exposed to VR. So there will be opportunities for them to participate in some VR and empathy in VR experiences, especially in the new year coming right up.
Yeah, we'll be doing those at the Makerspace with Virginia Barlow and at the Theriault campus with Adam Dagenet. And yeah, just reach out to me and we'll schedule something so you can have that experience.
Yes, excellent. Okay, everybody.
I was going to say, sorry, Rob, just last thing, in the slides, there are lots of links to other materials, so feel free to look in the notes section in the slides.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Rob, for giving us this fascinating talk today. It's always great hearing you speak and hear your enthusiasm around this technology. It's infectious, and I think everybody on this call is like just dying to try it out if they have not tried it.